So this is a quick review of setting up a menu system in Unity using Playmaker. So we'll use the UGUI system or the UI system that's built into Unity, but we'll use Playmaker to interact with it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I need to get the Unity UI actions set for Playmaker. And I can do that by going to the Playmaker or the Hotong Games website, the developers of Playmaker. And I can go to their wiki, and from the wiki we can go to the add-on section where we can find the Unity UI action set. Now I'll post a link in the comments of the video, but there's two things that we can download. We can download the UGUI proxy, or we can download the UGUI proxy with a full set of actions. For this demo, I'm not going to use the full set of actions. I'm just going to use just the UGUI proxy. So I've downloaded that. It's in my downloads folder. I'm now going to go back to Unity, and I have a game level here that I'll use as the demo here. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to import the UGUI actions for Playmaker. So I already have Playmaker installed. Playmaker is active and up and running. I'm going to go to the Assets menu. I'm going to import package. I'm going to import a custom package. I'll navigate to my Downloads folder. This is where I have the UGUI proxy, and I'll open that. I'll import these assets, and when I do, I end up with a Playmaker UGUI folder inside my Assets folder. Now the first step is that we need the UGUI prefab. There's a Playmaker UGUI prefab that needs to go into the hierarchy. Okay, and this kind of manages the conversation between Playmaker and the UGUI event system. So we got to make sure that we have this proxy inside the scene. The next thing that we want to do is we want to set up our menu. Now we'll do that by going to Game Object, UI, and I'm going to insert or create a button. Now when I do, you'll notice that we get a couple of different objects inside our hierarchy. We get a canvas and we get a button, and the button actually has a child, and I'll just reveal that. So we have a canvas that renders and aligns the button. We have the button object, and inside the button object we have a text item. Now this text game object is the label for the button. So I can see that I have a button down here in the bottom left hand corner of my game scene. So I just have my scene and my game view split out into two separate windows. So I have my scene, game, and I just kind of pulled my game view out here. And you'll notice that I have this button rendering down the bottom left hand corner. For this demo, I want to render the button in the center of the screen, and I can do that by selecting the button object. If I look inside the inspector, there's a little rect transform widget here in the top left hand corner. This will allow me to align the anchor and the pivot and the object itself. If I click on this little widget here, it'll allow me to align this in different ways to the game screen. And it says here that our anchor presets, if we hold down the Shift and the Alt key, will also set the pivot and the position of the button at the same time. So what I'll do is I'll hold down Shift and Alt, and I'll click right in the center, and you can see that that snaps the button to the center. So the button will now render in the center of the screen. And so for the demo, I'm just going to have my menu pop up right in the middle of the screen. So I don't want this button to say button. I want it to say whatever the action of this button is going to be. So I'll jump into the text element of the button, the child of the button, and I'll look for the text script, and I'll just update the text to say play. So now the button label has been updated, and now I'll just add or wire up the interactivity for this. So I have a Playmaker UGUI prefab in the hierarchy. The next thing that I need to do is I need to select the button object itself, and I need to go to the inspector and add a component. The component that I'm looking to add is the Playmaker UGUI proxy. So I'll just search for Playmaker proxy, and I'll search through this list. It says Playmaker UGUI component proxy, and I'll add that to the button. Once we add that, we get this component down here. And it gives us a little bit of information about the action set for the button. Now we're getting a little warning here because we have not yet added a state machine to the button. So I'll right click, I'll add an FSM, and we now have a state. Now, the way that we'll transition from one state to another using this UGUI proxy is we're listening for an on-click event. We can see it here in this component over here that this is the event that we're looking for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on the state. I'm going to add a transition. I'm looking for a custom transition, and I'm looking for the UGUI transitions, and I'm looking for on-click. So once I have on-click, I'll wire this over to another state. So I can either right-click and add a state, or I'll hold down the Command key while I drag from that transition, and it results in another state. And so now this is a testable event. So I have a button that's listening for an on-click event. So if we click on the button, we should transition to state 2. So I'll hit the play button to test this. I'll click play, and I can see now that it transitions to state 2. So this is so we have the basic functionality of the button. We just need to add some logic and some actions here to do what we want it to do. So I have, in order to get this to work, we need the Playmaker UGUI action set, which we've downloaded. We've imported the assets. I've dragged the Playmaker UGUI prefab into the hierarchy. Got to have that there. We then created the UI button. The button rendered a canvas because there was not a canvas in the scene just yet. We end up with a button. The button has a text label. With the button selected, we added a component, and the component that we added was the Playmaker UGUI component proxy. Once we had the proxy added, we could add a state machine and look for that on-click event. So that's the basic setup. There's 3 basic components to get this to work. Now, we'll push this a little bit further so that we can kind of manage this menu on screen, and we'll set up some actions and logic to get this button to work. So right now, if I hit the play button and I test this play button, right now we're in state 1. I click on the play button, it advances to state 2, and of course we can't click the play button again because the on-click event is in state 1. So I'll toggle the play button. So we want to get this button, in this case, to reset so that we could test it again. So in order to do this, I'll just add a simple finished event and pass this back to state 1. So when I hit the play button now, and I hit the play on screen, you can see it advances to state 2. Once it does, it's finished and goes back and resets and listens for another click. Okay, so depending on the function of your button, you might want to loop it back to the initial state so that you can continue to click on it. Now, the logic here is that we want to be able to resume our gameplay, and maybe we want to quit our application. So I'll mock up 2 buttons. So I'll save myself a little bit of time by duplicating this button, this play button. In fact, maybe I'll name this button. I'll call this play button because that's what it is. I'll duplicate this button. That way I don't have to set up the UGUI component again, and I don't have to set up all this simple state machine. So I'll just select the play button in the hierarchy, and I'll use Command D to duplicate, and now I get another instance of the play button. Now, they're stacked right on top of each other. There's 2 play buttons, and so what I'll do is I'll select the second play button, and I'll go to the inspector, and in the rect transform, I'm going to find the Y position, and I'll just reduce the Y position. I'll just lower that, and you can see that as I either drag the Y position down or as I add this negative number, this negative value, I'll use -40, you can see that it offsets the Y position of the second instance of the play button. So I'm going to call this will be the quit button, and I'll just reveal the hierarchy of the quit button. I'll select the child text, and this is just a little text UI element that renders the text. So we'll use this for our quit label. So we now have a play button and we have a quit button. They both perform the same action right now. They're both listening for on click. They pass to state 2. There's currently no actions, no logic, Nothing happens in state 2 yet for either of the buttons, but we'll fix that in just a minute. But before we do, we want to manage this menu system. So if we're playing our game, we don't want the menu up during gameplay. We probably want to hit a key, a toggle key, maybe like the escape key, to reveal and hide this menu. So we'll set that logic up, and in order to do that, we want to kind of manage this information in the hierarchy. So right now we have a canvas system, and that is rendering, laying out the buttons, the play and the quit button. So this canvas is the thing that we're going to want to reveal and hide, and we can do that by enabling and disabling this canvas. Now, this UI canvas or any game object, if we deactivate the game object, it's not going to run any logic that's attached to it. So any scripts that are attached to it or any Playmaker state machines that are attached to it are not going to run. So we actually don't want to assign our menu management, our toggle button, to our canvas, but this is the object that we want to show and hide. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an empty game object. The empty game object, this is going to be our menu manager, and this will contain the logic for our menu. This will show and hide the canvas system and do anything else that we want to do that pertains to the button. Now, I'm going to take the canvas, I'm going to drag and drop that into the menu manager. So we have the menu, manager, we have this canvas, and what I'll do is I'll just rename this canvas. I'll call this menu canvas, or I could just call it menu, but it happens to be the canvas that renders the buttons. So I'll go back up to the menu manager. Let me zoom back in here so that we can see what's going on. There we go. So I'm going to select my menu manager. I'll add a state machine by right-clicking, add an FSM, and this will be a really simple state machine. We just want to create, first we want to create the logic loop for listening for some keyboard input, and I'll map this to the escape key. So what I'll do is listen for a get key down. So we can find this in the input menu. So if I were to look for this manually, I'd go to input, get key, and I want to do a get key down. Let's try that again, double click. I don't know why it keeps disappearing, but there we go. So get key down. The key that I'm listening for, in this case, you can map it to whatever you want. Maybe you want to do the tab key. I'm going to map it to the escape key. When we press the escape key, we want to send an event. I don't have any existing custom events yet, so I'll just create a new event. And the event that I'm going to create, I'll just call this next. It's just a nice generic name for an event that I can reuse over and over in simple state machines. I'll right click and add that transition, that next transition, and I'll wire this over to a second state. I'm going to right click and add the transition next again and loop this back. Okay, so a little bit of a workflow issue here. I want to listen to the escape key again on state 2. So I could save myself a lot of work. I'll just delete state 2. I'll select state 1. I want this transition, and I want this input action for get key down. So I'll just copy the state. I could select it and Command C to copy. I could also right click and choose to copy states, and I'll right click and now I'll choose to paste states. Because I copied a state that is set as the start state, Playmaker's asking me if I want to set it as the start. I'll say no, and then I'll just wire these two next commands back to each other, these next transition events back to each other. So I have state 1 and state 2, and they're essentially doing the same thing. They're just listening for the escape key to be pressed. So let me test this. I'll hit the play button. I'm in state 1. I'll hit the escape key, and now I'm in state 2. I'll hit escape, and now I go back to state 1. So I basically created a toggle with the escape button. And now we'll use these two states to control the menu canvas. Okay, and the way that we'll do this is state 1, this will be our gameplay state. When we're playing our game, we start playing our game, we want our menu system to be turned off. So what I'll do is I'll call this menu off. I'll go to state 2 and I'll call this menu on. Okay, so I'll go back to our off state. And what we want to do is we want to control whether the menu canvas is enabled or not. So now what I want to do is I want to be able to do a get or set property here for the menu canvas in this menu manager. And so if I select my menu canvas, you'll see that I lose my state machine. And I really want to focus on the menu manager state machine. So what I can do is I'll press this lock button at the top of the Playmaker editor window, which allows me to select other game objects in the hierarchy while staying focused on whatever state machine that I've locked. So remember, we're looking at the menu manager state machine right now. Okay. And I'm going to select the menu canvas. And by selecting the menu canvas, this will allow me to show and hide the canvas system on these states. And so the workflow will go something like this. I have the menu canvas selected. I'm focusing on the menu manager state machine. And I'm just going to drag the canvas object. I'll select the label of canvas. And I'll drag this into my state area in the Playmaker editor. Now, when I release, for some reason, my get set property is popping up down here. Hopefully yours will pop up a little bit closer to your mouse. But I want a set property. And when I do, we get this set property. It's looking at the menu canvas system. And the property that we want to set is enabled. And what enabled is saying is that the enabled, okay, is a bool, and the value of that bool is either on or it's off. If it's checked, it means it's on. If it's off, it means enabled is turned off. So this value of enabled does not mean that it's necessarily turned on. Enabled means, is it enabled? And the value of it is either it's on or it's off. Okay, so at the start of the state machine, right now, we're saying that the menu canvas system, it's enabled, is turned off. So if I hit the play button, we should see this menu go away because it will be turned into the off state. So I'll hit play and we can see that the menu's gone. That's because the canvas is no longer enabled. I'll toggle the play button. I'm going to go to the menu on state and we'll do the same thing. We'll grab the canvas and we'll drag this in and we'll release it. And I want to set a property. The property for the menu canvas system that I want to set is enabled. And in the menu on state, I want to make sure that the set value is turned on. So in other words, when the menu is off, we're toggling the canvas off. When the menu is in the on state, we're toggling the canvas back on. And so we should get this result now that when we tap the escape key, which we've mapped, we show and hide this menu system. Okay, so our game is still running in the background. You can see that there's, our game has not stopped, and we can control that. By simply scaling time. So the time scale by default in Unity is running at 1. And so what we'll do is when our menu is off, we want our time scale to be set to a normal state. But when the menu is on, we want to scale time to a much slower state. So I'll type in scale, and you'll notice that down in the time category, there's scale time. So I'll double click and add that scale time. And what we'll do is we'll scale time down to 0. In other words, we'll basically pause the gameplay. We'll pause the simulation. So we're telling time to scale down to 0. Now you'll find out that we'll have a little bit of a bug here in just a moment when we hit escape to go back to hide the menu, in that if we're setting the time scale to 0, we need to explicitly set it back to run at a scale of 1. So if I toggle the escape button, you can see that we've stopped time. When I hit escape though, our menu does go away, but it doesn't start time again. So let's fix that. So I'll go back to our menu off state. I'm going to go find our time scale. I'll double click again, and we'll just set our time scale back to 1. So now we get this result where our menu is turned off. We tap the escape key, our menu is available, and time is scaled to 0, or it's paused. Hit the escape key and it resumes its start. So we have this toggle button. We're revealing the menu. The only thing that we're missing is functionality on our buttons. And so we could do this same thing. We could essentially set up the same values or actions on our play button. What we'll do is, now remember, I locked my Playmaker state machine, so I'm going to unlock that so I can go back to the play button. And now I can influence the logic of this play button. Now, as far as the play button goes, the play button is just toggling just like our escape, but we want our play button to talk to the menu manager. Okay, so we start getting into this area where we have state machines talking to each other, or state machines talking to other game objects and sending events on other game objects. Okay, and in order to do this, what we need to do is we need to start thinking in terms of global events. So just to demonstrate this, what I'll do is I'll go back to my menu manager. And what I want to do is imagine that if we hit the play button, our menu is going to have to be in the on state in order for us to see the play menu in the first place. So when I hit the play button, really all I want to do is go back to our menu off state. Okay, now in order to do this, we want to be able to talk to the state machine from the button, and there's a fairly easy way to do that. What we'll do is we'll go to events, and we're going to create a new event, and we'll call this, we could call this, we'll just call this play, or return to game. We'll call this return to game. So now I have an event. Now, in order to get this event available to be sent by another state machine, what we need to do is we need to tell it to be a global transition, which we can do by clicking this little checkbox here. And what we'll do is the menu off state, we're going to right click and we'll add a global transition. And the global transition that I'm looking for is the return to game. Now, when we do that, you'll see that we get another label up here next to start. In this case, start is effectively a global transition. And we now have a second global transition that says return to game. So what we can do is from another state machine, we can go find the menu manager and say return to game, and it'll send us to whatever it's pointing to. In this case, it's menu off. So I'll go to the play button. When we click, we go to state 2. So state 2 is really where we want to send this, we want to broadcast this action or send this event. And we'll do this by using a send event. So I'm going to look to my state machine category of actions, and I'm looking specifically for a send event, and I'll double click. And we're looking to send an event on a state machine, not on the owner of this state machine, but on a game object. And the game object we'll specify here, rather than using owner, we're going to specify the game object. The game object that we want to talk to is the menu manager, so we'll drag that in. And the event that we want to send, we'll find down here in the global events, we created one that said return to game. Okay, so by clicking on this play button, we advance to state 2. State 2 looks to the menu manager and fires off a return to game transition event. If we go look at our menu manager, our return to game sends it to menu off. So if everything's wired correctly, we should be able to hit the escape key. We pause. When I hit the play button, we return back to our game. So we're effectively doing, when we hit the play button, we're activating this return to game. So that's just kind of a high level overview of the setting up a menu. Now, of course, you can do a lot of different things from the menu. This quit button, it's already wired to have basic interactivity on state 2. We could do a quit, an application quit. This will cause our game to actually quit. Now, that won't work in the preview. That has to be in a build, a standalone build, in order for the application to be able to quit. But you can experiment with that and play around with the menu. And we can cover any questions you might have in class.